Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the third planet from the yellow star grow larger on the main screen. His scaled hands gripped the command rail as he studied the world called Earth. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, covered in blue water and white clouds, but Zethkar knew better than to trust appearances. "Commander, we are detecting movement near the fourth planet," reported his weapons officer. "Multiple small craft approaching our position." Zethkar nodded. The humans were coming to meet them, just as intelligence had predicted. His people, the Vorthak, had conquered 17 star systems in the past century. Each time, the pattern was the same. The local species would send their best ships to challenge the Vorthak fleet. The Vorthak would destroy them quickly, then the planet would surrender. "How many ships?" Zethkar asked. 12 vessels, Commander. All small patrol craft. No match for our firepower." Zethkar almost smiled. 12 ships against his fleet of 30 warships. The humans were either very brave or very stupid, probably both. "Open a channel to the human vessels," he ordered. The communication officer worked at his station for a moment. "Channel open, Commander." "Human ships, this is Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire. You are outgunned and outnumbered. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." The response came back immediately. The voice was calm, almost casual. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Liberty. We don't surrender. If you want this system, you'll have to take it." Zethkar studied the human ships on his screen. They were small and looked fragile compared to his massive warships. Their weapons were primitive, their armor was thin, yet something in the human captain's voice made him pause. "You have no chance of victory," Zethkar said into the communication device. "Why throw away your lives?" "Because this is our home," came the reply, "and we don't let strangers take our home without a fight." Zethkar cut the channel. He had heard similar words from other species, but they usually surrendered after the first exchange of fire. The humans would learn quickly enough. "All ships, prepare for battle," he commanded. "Destroy the human vessels." The Vorthak fleet moved forward. Their weapons powered up, casting a red glow across the darkness of space. The human ships spread out, forming a loose formation. Zethkar watched them with professional interest. They were positioning themselves to make his ships work harder to target them. It was a good tactic, but it would only delay the inevitable. The first exchange of fire came when the fleets were still far apart. Zethkar's ships opened fire with their long-range weapons. Bright beams of energy crossed the space between them. The human ships scattered, moving in patterns that seemed random but somehow avoided most of the incoming fire. "They're faster than expected," noted his tactical officer. "It doesn't matter," Zethkar replied. "Continue firing." The human ships returned fire with their own weapons. The energy beams were weaker than Vorthak weapons, but they were accurate. One of Zethkar's escort ships took several hits to its forward shields. "Minor damage to the Sword of Conquest," reported the communication officer. "Their weapons are more effective than intelligence suggested." Zethkar frowned. The intelligence reports had described human weapons as primitive. These beams were definitely more advanced than expected. Still, they were not powerful enough to seriously threaten his fleet. The battle continued for several minutes. The human ships darted between the Vorthak vessels like small fish around large predators. They were hard to hit, but every shot they took was aimed well. Slowly, the Vorthak ships began to show damage. "Commander," called the tactical officer, "the humans are using unusual tactics. They're targeting our weapon systems specifically." Zethkar looked at the tactical display. The officer was right. Instead of trying to destroy his ships outright, the humans were aiming for weapons, shields, and engines. They were trying to disable rather than destroy. "Interesting," he murmured. "They're fighting to survive, not to win." But even fighting to survive, the humans were losing. 3 of their ships had been destroyed, and the rest were taking heavy damage. Zethkar was about to order his ships to finish them off when something unexpected happened. One of the human ships, smaller than the others, suddenly accelerated toward his flagship. It was trailing fire and atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. The ship was clearly dying. "Commander," his weapons officer called out, "that ship is on a collision course. It's not responding to our targeting computers." Zethkar realized what was happening. The human ship was going to ram his vessel, but it was too small to do serious damage to his flagship. It would be destroyed against his shields. "Let it come," he said. "It cannot hurt us." The human ship, which Zethkar's computers identified as a fighter craft, slammed into his flagship's main cannon. The impact was tremendous. The fighter was vaporized instantly, but the explosion damaged the cannon's focusing array. Sparks flew across the bridge as systems overloaded. "Main cannon offline," reported the weapons officer. "Estimated repair time, 6 hours." Zethkar stared at the screen where the human ship had been. In his culture, warriors died in battle for glory and honor. But this human had died for a tactical advantage. The small ship had sacrificed itself to take out his most powerful weapon. "Commander," the tactical officer said, "the remaining human ships are retreating toward the 4th planet." Zethkar nodded. "Let them go. We have learned what we needed to know." But as he watched the human ships disappear into the distance, Zethkar felt something he had never experienced before. The human ships were battered and outnumbered. They had lost a quarter of their force. By all rights, they should have been broken and demoralized. Instead, they were retreating in good order. Their formation was tight and disciplined. They were covering each other's retreat, making sure no ship was left behind. Even in defeat, they fought like a unit. "Sir," his communication officer said, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through." The voice was different this time, younger, female. "4th Fleet, this is Lieutenant Amy Brooks. You got lucky today. Next time we'll be ready for you." The transmission ended. Zethkar found himself staring at the communication panel. The human had called his victory luck. After destroying 3 of their ships and damaging the rest, the humans still thought they could win. "Commander," his tactical officer said, "should we pursue?" Zethkar considered it. His ships could catch the retreating humans easily, but something held him back. In 17 previous conquests, no species had ever spoken to him like that after a defeat. Most begged for mercy. Some raged about revenge, but none had ever sounded so confident. "No," he said finally. "We return to the fleet. Prepare a report for the High Command." As his ship turned away from the 4th planet, Zethkar thought about the human who had rammed his flagship. The pilot could have ejected, could have tried to escape. Instead, she had chosen to die to damage his ship. Her sacrifice had saved the other human vessels by giving them time to retreat. In Vorthak culture, such a death would be honored. The Siu warrior would be remembered in songs and stories. But Zethkar had listened to the human communications during the battle. There had been no talk of honor or glory. The humans had talked about protecting each other, about getting everyone home safely. They had not fought like warriors seeking death in battle. They had fought like people trying to live. The thought disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. As his fleet prepared to return to the main force, Zethkar realized that conquering Earth might be more difficult than anyone had expected. Not because of human weapons or tactics, but because of something else entirely. The humans fought differently. They fought like they had something to lose. 3 months had passed since the first battle near Mars. Zethkar now stood in the command center of the main Vorthak invasion fleet, watching the tactical display showing Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. The humans had built their primary military command center there deep beneath the ice. Intelligence reports called it New Geneva. "The fortress is well defended," reported General Korthax, the overall commander of the invasion. 30,000 human soldiers, multiple shield generators, enough supplies for a long siege. Zethkar studied the data. "How many troops do we have?" 200,000 warriors, plus full orbital support. The humans cannot win. Zethkar nodded, but something bothered him. After the battle at Mars, he had studied human military history. Humans had a disturbing habit of fighting harder when they were outnumbered. They called it being backed into a corner. "Begin the assault," General Korthax ordered. The Vorthak fleet moved into position around Europa. Massive troop carriers descended toward the moon's surface while warships provided covering fire. Zethkar commanded one of the assault groups, leading 50,000 warriors against the human outer defenses. The battle began at dawn. Europa time. Zethkar's forces advanced across the frozen landscape toward the human fortifications. The buildings were made of metal and concrete, built to withstand the harsh conditions of the moon. But they would not withstand Vorthak firepower. First, wave! Advance! Zethkar commanded. His warriors moved forward in perfect formation. They had trained for this kind of assault for years. The humans opened fire from their defensive positions, but their weapons were no match for Vorthak armor and shields. The first human defense line fell within an hour. Zethkar expected the humans to retreat to their second line, but something strange happened. Instead of pulling back, the human soldiers stayed in their positions and kept fighting. Even when their bunkers were destroyed, they continued to fire from the rubble. "Sir," reported his second-in-command, "the humans are not retreating. They're fighting from positions that cannot be defended." Zethkar moved to the front lines to see for himself. Through his helmet's display, he watched human soldiers firing from behind broken walls and collapsed buildings. They had no hope of stopping his advance, but they kept fighting anyway. "Advance to the second line," he ordered. The battle for the second defense line took longer. The humans had prepared the ground well, with hidden weapons and defensive positions, built into the moon's surface. But what impressed Zethkar was not their defenses, but their determination. He watched a human soldier, a young woman with sergeant's stripes, organize the defense of a crucial position. Her name tag read Davis. She moved between her troops, checking on wounded soldiers and directing fire. When a Vorthak plasma cannon destroyed her position, she simply moved to another one and continued fighting. That human commander, Zethkar, said to his aide, "She's been fighting for 6 hours without rest. Shall we target her specifically, sir?" Zethkar considered it. In Vorthak warfare, eliminating enemy commanders was a priority. But he found himself curious about this human female. She was clearly exhausted, but she never stopped moving, never stopped fighting. The second line fell after 2 days of fighting. The humans retreated to their third and final defensive line, but they did not run. They moved in good order, covering each other's withdrawal. They carried their wounded with them, refusing to leave anyone behind. "Impressive discipline," admitted Zethkar's aide. "Yes," Zethkar agreed. "But they're still losing." The final assault began on the 4th day. Zethkar's forces had surrounded the human command center, a massive underground complex built into Europa's ice. The humans had nowhere to retreat. This was their last stand. General Lisa Carter commanded the human forces. Zethkar had intercepted her communications and knew she was considered one of Earth's best military leaders. She had 30,000 troops left, facing his 200,000. "Human commander," Zethkar broadcast on an open channel, "You are surrounded. Your position cannot be held. Surrender now and your soldiers will be treated according to the laws of war." The response came back immediately. "This is General Carter. We don't surrender, we don't retreat. This is where we make our stand." Zethkar had heard similar words before, but something in the human general's voice was different. She was not angry or desperate. She sounded calm, almost peaceful, like someone who had already accepted what was going to happen. The final battle lasted 3 days. Zethkar's forces attacked from every direction, but the humans held their positions. They fought from bunkers, from tunnels, from the ruins of their own buildings. When their heavy weapons were destroyed, they used light weapons. When their light weapons ran out, they used hand weapons. On the second day, Zethkar witnessed something that would stay with him forever. A human soldier, barely old enough to be called an adult, was defending a narrow passage that led to the Human Medical Center. His name tag read Stone. He was alone, his entire squad killed in the previous assault. "Private Stone," Zethkar heard on the human communication channel. "Fall back to the secondary position." "Negative, sir," the young human replied. "If I leave this position, your wounded are exposed. I'm staying." Zethkar watched through his tactical display as the young human fought alone for 6 hours. Wave after wave of Vorthak warriors tried to break through the passage, but the human held them back. He used every piece of cover, every tactical advantage he could find. When the human was finally wounded, Zethkar expected him to retreat or surrender. Instead, The young soldier continued fighting from behind his barricade. He called in orbital bombardment on his own position, directing the fire even as Vorthak warriors closed in on him. "Fire mission complete," the human said into his radio. "Passage is clear. Medical center is secure." Those were his last words. When Zethkar's forces finally took the position, they found the young human's body still holding his weapon. Around him lay the bodies of 50 Vorthak warriors. "Sir," reported Zethkar's aide, "the human held this position for 6 hours against impossible odds. Why didn't he retreat?" Zethkar stared at the young human's body. In Vorthak culture, such courage would be celebrated in songs and stories. But the human had not fought for glory or honor. He had fought to protect wounded soldiers he would never meet. "I don't know," Zethkar said quietly. The battle ended on the third day when Zethkar's forces finally broke through the human lines. General Carter and her remaining troops made their last stand in the command center itself. When the fighting was over, fewer than 100 humans remained alive. Zethkar found General Carter in the ruins of her command post. She was wounded but still conscious. Around her lay the bodies of her staff still at their posts. "General," Zethkar said, "you fought well. Your soldiers showed great courage." Carter looked up at him with tired eyes. "Courage? No. We just did what we had to do. You lost 30,000 soldiers defending a position that could not be held. Was it worth it?" The human general was quiet for a long moment. "Every hour we held you here was an hour our families had to evacuate. Every day we fought was a day our children had to reach safety. So yes, it was worth it." Zethkar felt something strange in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. The humans had not fought for military advantage or strategic gain. They had fought to buy time for their families to escape. "Your species is unusual," he said. Carter smiled, despite her wounds. "We're not warriors like you. We're just people trying to protect the ones we love." As Zethkar left the command center, he thought about the young human soldier who had died defending the medical center. The boy had not fought for glory or honor. He had fought for wounded soldiers he didn't even know. The Vorthak had won the Battle of New Geneva. They had destroyed the human military command and captured the moon. But Zethkar felt no satisfaction in the victory. Instead, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt like he had destroyed something precious, something that could never be replaced. The humans had not just been defending a military position. They had been defending their way of life, their belief that some things were worth dying for. That night, as Zethkar prepared his report on the battle, he found himself thinking about the human general's words. The humans were not warriors like the Vorthak. They were something else entirely. They were people who loved so deeply that they would die to protect others. For the first time in his military career, Zethkar wondered if winning was worth the cost. 6 months after the fall of New Geneva, Zethkar found himself assigned to a new mission on Earth itself. The planet had been conquered, but human resistance groups were causing problems across the surface. His job was to hunt down these rebels and end their activities once and for all. Zethkar stood in his temporary command post in what had once been the city of Denver. Through the window he could see the remains of human civilization. Broken buildings reached toward the sky like dead fingers. Streets were empty except for Vorthak patrols and the occasional human moving between safe zones. "Commander," his intelligence officer reported, "we have located another resistance cell. They are operating from the mountains west of the city." Zethkar studied the tactical display. The human rebels had chosen their hiding place well. The mountains provided cover from orbital scans, and the terrain made it difficult for large forces to operate. "How many rebels?" he asked. "Intelligence estimates 50 to 60 humans. They appear to be led by a female called Dr. Helen Scott." Zethkar accessed the human database on his computer. Dr. Helen Scott had been a children's doctor before the invasion. She had no military training, no combat experience. Yet somehow she was leading a resistance group that had been avoiding capture for months. A doctor leading soldiers, Zethkar mused. Interesting. "Sir, should we prepare an orbital bombardment? We could eliminate the entire area." Zethkar considered it. A single strike from orbit would end the problem quickly and efficiently. But something made him hesitate. He had been studying human behavior for months now, trying to understand what made them so different from other species the Vorthak had conquered. "No," he said finally. "Prepare a ground assault. I want to capture some of these rebels alive for questioning." The assault began at dawn. Zethkar led 500 warriors into the mountains, following the intelligence reports to the rebel hideout. They moved carefully through the rocky terrain, expecting ambushes and traps. The first sign of the human presence was not weapons fire, but something unexpected. Zethkar's scouts reported finding a small school built into a cave system. Inside were dozens of human children, being taught by adult rebels. "They're running a school in the middle of a war zone," reported his second-in-command. Zethkar moved, to see for himself. Through his helmet display, he watched human children sitting in a circle, while an elderly man read to them from a book. The man's name tag identified him as Paul Martin, a former teacher. "Sir," his tactical officer said, "we could capture all the children. Use them to force the rebels to surrender." Zethkar watched the human teacher continue reading even though Vorthak warriors were approaching. The man showed no fear, only concern, for the children around him. "No," Zethkar said. "Continue the mission." They found the main rebel camp deeper in the mountains. It was larger than intelligence had suggested, with over 100 humans of all ages. Zethkar saw teenagers working alongside grandparents, all focused on the same goal of resisting the occupation. The battle began when the rebels realized they had been discovered. But this was unlike any military engagement Zethkar had ever experienced. The humans fought not in organized units but as individuals in small groups. They used the terrain expertly, appearing from hidden positions to attack his forces before disappearing again. What disturbed Zethkar was that many of the rebels were not soldiers at all. He saw a woman who had been a teacher using explosives to block mountain passes. A man who had been a shopkeeper was coordinating supply drops with coded radio messages. "Commander," his communications officer reported, "we're intercepting rebel transmissions. They're evacuating non-combatants to safety." Zethkar listened to the human radio chatter. Dr. Helen Scott's voice came through clearly, calm and professional even in the middle of battle. "Move the children to Shelter 3, she ordered. "Medical team, we have wounded at Position 7. Paul, get those kids out of there now." The teacher Zethkar had seen earlier was leading a group of children through the mountain paths, away from the fighting. Vorthak warriors could have easily captured them, but something held Zethkar back from giving that order. The battle continued for hours. The humans fought with determination, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Slowly, Zethkar's forces pushed them back toward their main camp. That was when something happened that changed everything for Zethkar. One of his warriors was badly wounded by a human explosive device. The injured Vorthak lay in the open, bleeding from multiple wounds. Zethkar's forces were pinned down by human fire and could not reach him. Then a human figure appeared from behind the rocks. It was a woman wearing the medical symbol of the resistance. She ran toward the wounded Vorthak warrior, ignoring the weapons fire around her. "Hold fire," Zethkar ordered his troops. He wanted to see what the human would do. The woman reached the wounded Vorthak and immediately began treating his injuries. She worked quickly and efficiently, using human medical supplies to stop the bleeding and stabilize his condition. All around her, the battle continued, but she focused only on saving a life. "Why is she helping him?" asked Zethkar's aide. "He's the enemy." Zethkar watched the human medic work. When she finished treating the Vorthak warrior, she looked directly at Zethkar's position and held up her hands to show she was unarmed. "This is Jennifer Kim," she called out. "I'm a nurse. Your soldier will live, but he needs immediate medical attention." Zethkar authorized a temporary ceasefire to retrieve his wounded warrior. As his troops carried the injured Vorthak to safety, he approached the human nurse. "Why did you save him?" he asked through his helmet's translator. Jennifer Kim looked tired but determined. "Because he was hurt, and I'm a doctor. That's what we do. But he is your enemy. He came here to kill your people." The human woman was quiet for a moment. "Maybe. But right now he was just someone who needed help." Zethkar stared at her. In his culture, enemies were enemies. You fought them until one side won. The idea of helping an enemy was completely foreign to Vorthak thinking. You could have let him die, Zethkar said. It would have been one less warrior for us to use against you. I could have, Jennifer agreed. But then I wouldn't be me anymore. I wouldn't be human. The battle resumed after the wounded warrior was evacuated. But Zethkar found himself distracted by what he had seen. The human nurse had risked her life to save an enemy soldier. She had gained nothing from it except the knowledge that she had done the right thing. The resistance camp finally fell as the sun was setting. Most of the rebels escaped deeper into the mountains, but Zethkar's forces captured several dozen, including Dr. Helen Scott and the teacher, Paul Martin. Zethkar questioned Dr. Scott personally. She was a small woman, probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and gentle hands. Nothing about her looked like a military leader. Dr. Scott, Zethkar said, you are a children's doctor. Why are you leading a resistance movement? Because someone has to, she replied simply. These people need leadership, and I was there to provide it. You have no military training, no combat experience. How do you expect to defeat the Vorthaka Empire? Dr. Scott smiled sadly. We don't expect to defeat you, Commander. We just expect to remain human. What does that mean? It means we take care of each other. We protect our children. We remember who we were before you came. We don't let you take away what makes us human. Zethkar studied the human doctor. Even if it means your death? Especially if it means our death. Because the moment we stop caring about each other, the moment we stop helping those who need help, you've already won. Not just the war, but our souls. That night, Zethkar sat in his command post reviewing the day's events. His forces had achieved their objective. They had broken up the resistance cell and captured its leaders. By any military standard, it had been a successful operation, but Zethkar felt no satisfaction. Instead, he kept thinking about the human nurse who had saved his wounded warrior. She had gained nothing from her action except the knowledge that she had done the right thing. He thought about Dr. Scott's words. The humans were not fighting to win the war. They were fighting to remain human. They were fighting to preserve something that Zethkar was only beginning to understand. The Vorthak were warriors. They lived for battle, for conquest, for the glory of victory. But the humans were something else. They were people who cared more about saving lives than taking them. People who would risk everything to help a child learn to read or to treat a wounded enemy. For the first time since the invasion began, Zethkar wondered what his people were really fighting for. They had conquered Earth, but what had they gained? Territory? Resources? Or had they destroyed something precious that could never be replaced? As he prepared his report on the day's operation, Zethkar found himself leaving out certain details. He did not mention the nurse who had saved his warrior. He did not include Dr. Scott's words about remaining human. Some things, he realized, were too important to put in a military report. 2 years into the occupation of Earth, Zethkar found himself fighting in the ruins of Chicago. The humans had turned the dead city into a maze of hiding places and ambush points. Every building could hide rebels. Every street could become a battlefield. Zethkar led his patrol through the empty streets, watching for signs of human activity. The city had been beautiful once, he could tell. Tall buildings reached toward the sky, and wide roads showed where millions of humans had once lived and worked. Now it was a graveyard of broken concrete and twisted metal. Contact ahead, reported his scout. Human resistance fighters in the building complex to the north. Zethkar raised his weapon and signaled his troops to spread out. They had been hunting this particular group of rebels for weeks. Intelligence said they were led by a former construction worker named Bill Murphy, who had turned his knowledge of building structures into deadly trap-making skills. The battle began when Zethkar's troops entered the first building. Explosions echoed through the structure as human-made traps activated. His warriors fought room by room, floor by floor, against enemies who knew every hiding place in the building. "Sir?" called his second-in-command. "We have the humans trapped, on the upper floors. Should we call in air support?" Zethkar was about to agree when something went wrong. A massive explosion shook the building. Debris fell from the ceiling and emergency lights flickered on and off. Part of the floor collapsed, separating Zethkar from most of his troops. "Commander, are you injured?" came a voice through his helmet. Radio Zethkar checked his armor systems. Several warnings flashed red on his display. His left leg was damaged, and his weapon was broken. Worse, he was alone and cut off from his forces. "I am wounded but functional," he reported. "Continue the mission. I will find another way out." But as Zethkar tried to move, pain shot through his leg. The injury was worse than he had thought. His armor's medical system warned him about internal bleeding. He needed help soon, or he would die in this ruined building. He heard footsteps approaching through the smoke and dust. Human voices spoke quietly nearby. Zethkar prepared to fight with his sidearm, expecting the rebels to finish him off. Instead, a human woman appeared through the smoke. She was young, probably in her 20s, wearing the simple clothes of a civilian. Her hands were raised to show she carried no weapons. "Don't move," she said calmly. "You're hurt badly. I'm a medic." Zethkar stared at her through his helmet display. The woman was clearly a rebel, but she was approaching him without fear. More importantly, she wanted to help him. "Why?" he asked through his translator. "Because you're injured, and I know how to help injured people. That's what I do." The woman knelt beside him and began examining his wounds with professional skill. Her name tag read Rachel Torres. She worked quickly, using human medical supplies to treat his injuries. "You are the enemy," Zethkar said. "I came here to kill your people." Rachel continued working on his wounds. "Maybe, but right now you're just someone who needs medical attention. My forces will come looking for me. They will kill you when they find you here." "Probably," Rachel agreed. "But that doesn't change what I have to do right now." Zethkar watched her work. Her hands were steady and sure despite the danger she was in. She cleaned his wounds, applied emergency bandages, and gave him something for the pain, all while enemy forces fought just floors above them. "There," she said finally. "That should hold until your people find you. Try not to move too much." "Why? Did you save me?" Zethkar asked. Rachel sat back on her heels and looked at him seriously. "Because I'm a doctor and you're hurt. It's really that simple. But I am your enemy. I have killed your people." "Yes," Rachel said quietly. "And maybe tomorrow we'll be fighting each other again. But today, right here, you needed help. So I helped." Something about her words made Zethkar's chest feel strange. In his culture, enemies were always enemies. You fought them, you killed them, or they killed you. The idea of helping an enemy was completely impossible for a Vorthak to understand. "Your species is very strange," he said. Rachel smiled slightly. "We get that a lot." She stood up and prepared to leave. "Your people should find you soon. The bleeding has stopped, but you need proper medical attention." "Wait," Zethkar called. "What is your name?" "Rachel Torres. I was a trauma nurse before the war. Now I help whoever needs help." "Why do you do this? Why risk your life to help enemies?" Rachel paused at the doorway. "Because the moment I stop caring about saving lives, I stop being who I am. I stop being human." She disappeared into the smoke, leaving Zethkar alone with his thoughts. 20 minutes later, his troops found him and carried him to safety. But the memory of the human medic stayed with him. During his recovery, Zethkar began accessing human cultural databases more frequently. He read their history, their literature, their philosophy. What he found disturbed him in ways he could not explain. He learned about human wars throughout their history. The humans had fought terrible conflicts, killing millions of their own kind. But after every war, they had tried to heal. They built hospitals for their enemies. They created laws to protect prisoners. They established organizations to help refugees and orphans. Zethkar read about something called the Geneva Convention, rules that humans had created to limit the brutality of war. Even in their most violent conflicts, humans tried to preserve some measure of mercy and compassion. He studied human medical ethics, the rules that doctors like Rachel Torres followed. They took oaths to help all people, regardless of who they were or what they had done. Enemy or friend, the oath was the same. Most disturbing of all, Zethkar learned about human concepts of forgiveness and redemption. Humans believed that people could change, that enemies could become friends, that hatred could be overcome with understanding. The Vorthak had no equivalent concepts. In their culture, enemies remained enemies forever. Conquest was final. The defeated served the victors until death. There was no forgiveness, no redemption, no second chances. But humans were different. Zethkar read about their wars where bitter enemies had become allies. He learned about human doctors who had treated the soldiers who had invaded their countries. He read about teachers who had educated the children of their former enemies. One story particularly disturbed him. During a conflict called World War II, human medics had treated wounded enemy soldiers with the same care they gave their own troops. They had risked their lives to save people who had been trying to kill them just hours before. Why? Zethkar asked aloud in his quarters. Why would they do such things? He found part of the answer in human philosophy and religion. Humans believed in something they called the value of life. Every human life was considered precious, regardless of nationality, race, or belief. This concept was so fundamental to human thinking that it appeared in every culture on their planet. Zethkar tried to understand this idea, but it was alien to everything he had been taught. Vorthak society valued strength, courage, and loyalty to the empire. Individual lives mattered only as they served the greater good of the species, but humans seemed to believe that every individual life had value in itself. Not because of what that person could do for others, but simply because they existed, even enemies, even people who had done terrible things. As Zethkar studied these concepts, he began to understand why the human medic had saved his life. It was not because she expected anything in return. It was not because she thought he would become her ally. She had saved him because in her mind, his life had value regardless of who he was or what he had done. The realization was terrifying. If humans were right about the value of life, then what were the Vorthak doing? They had conquered 17 star systems, destroying billions of lives in the process. They had justified it as necessary for the Empire's growth and strength. But what if every one of those lives had been precious? What if every human they had killed had been someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend? What if the Vorthak were not glorious conquerors, but simply destroyers of irreplaceable things? Zethkar tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept returning. Every night he dreamed of the human medic who had saved his life. Every day he remembered her words about remaining human. He began to watch his own troops differently. When they spoke casually about destroying human settlements, he found himself thinking about the children who lived there. When they planned raids on resistance cells, he wondered about the teachers and doctors and nurses who would die. For the first time in his life, Zethkar began to question whether winning was worth the cost. The Vorthak were conquering Earth, but they were also destroying something that might have been more valuable than any territory or resource. They were destroying the very thing that made humans worth knowing in the first place. Their capacity for mercy, for forgiveness, for seeing value in every life, even the lives of their enemies. As Zethkar prepared for his next mission, he realized that the human medic had done more than save his life. She had planted a seed of doubt that was growing larger every day. A doubt about everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, everything his people represented. The humans were changing him, and he was not sure he could stop it from happening. 3 years had passed since the Vorthak invasion began. The war was nearly over. Earth's major cities had fallen, its armies were scattered, and most of its population lived under alien rule. But the humans refused to surrender completely. Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship looking down at Luna, Earth's moon. The last organized human resistance had gathered there for what everyone knew would be the final battle of the war. Intelligence reports counted fewer than 5,000 human soldiers and civilians, facing the entire Vorthak fleet. Admiral Kate Sullivan commands the human forces, reported his intelligence officer. She has 12 ships, all heavily damaged from previous battles. Zethkar studied the tactical display. The human ships were patched together with spare parts and desperate hope. Their weapons were nearly depleted. Their shields were failing. They had no chance of victory, yet they had chosen to make their stand here. in the shadow of their home. Planet. Sir, his communications officer announced, the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through. Admiral Sullivan's voice filled the bridge. She sounded tired, but determined. People of Earth, this is Admiral Kate Sullivan speaking from Luna Base. Today we fight our last battle. Not for victory, but for the memory of who we were. For the children who will come after us. For the hope that someday, humanity will be free again. Zethkar listened to the transmission with growing unease. In 3 years of war, he had learned to recognize something in human voices that disturbed him. It was not fear or hatred, or even sadness. It was love. They fought because they loved something more than life itself. All ships. Admiral Sullivan continued, remember why we're here. We're not just soldiers. We're teachers and doctors and engineers and artists. We're parents and children and friends. We carry the best of humanity with us into this battle. The transmission ended. General Korthax, the Vorthak commander, turned to his staff. Begin the final assault. End this war. Zethkar watched as the Vorthak fleet moved toward Luna. Hundreds of warships against 12 battered human vessels. It would be over quickly. But something made him request permission to monitor human communications during the battle. Why? Asked General Korthax. To understand their final tactics, Zethkar lied. The truth was more complicated. Over the past 3 years, Zethkar had become obsessed with understanding human behavior. Every battle, every encounter, had shown him something new about these strange creatures who fought wars differently than any species in the galaxy. The battle began as the Vorthak fleet entered weapons range. The human ships spread out, using Luna's gravity to slingshot around the moon and avoid the worst of the alien firepower. It was a desperate tactic, but it bought them precious time. Zethkar listened to the human communications as the battle raged. What he heard would haunt him for the rest of his life. Susan, keep your fighter close to mine, called out a pilot named Tony Rodriguez. We're going to make it through this together. Copy that, Tony. Just like we practiced. Zethkar watched. The 2 human fighters worked together, covering each other's attacks and sharing ammunition when one ran low. They were not just following orders, they were protecting each other. On the human flagship, Admiral Sullivan coordinated the defense with calm professionalism. But Zethkar could hear something else in her voice when she spoke to her crew. Engineering. How are our engines holding up? Barely, Admiral. But we'll keep them running as long as you need. Good. Medical. How are our wounded? We're doing everything we can, ma'am. Dr. Peterson is working miracles down here. Admiral Sullivan cared about her people. Not just as soldiers, but as individuals. She asked about their families, their fears, their hopes. Even in the middle of a losing battle, she took time to be human. The human ships fought for 2 hours, against impossible odds. One by one, they were destroyed by overwhelming Vorthak firepower. But with each ship that died, Zethkar heard something that shook him to his core. The final transmissions were not military reports or tactical updates. They were messages of love. A ship called the Freedom went down with its captain, Commander Patricia Wells, at the helm. Her last transmission was not a battle cry or a call for vengeance. It was a poem she had written for her daughter. My little star, remember me not as a soldier, but as your mother who loved you. Look up at the night sky and know that somewhere among the stars I am watching over you. Be brave, be kind, and never forget that love is stronger than fear. Zethkar found himself staring at the communication panel in shock. The human woman had used her final moments not to curse her enemies, but to tell her child she loved her. Another ship, the Hope, was destroyed while trying to evacuate wounded civilians from Luna Base. Captain Greg Foster stayed behind to make sure every refugee transport escaped safely. His last words were instructions for the survivors. Tell them to rebuild. Tell them to be better than we were. Tell them to remember that we fought not for hatred, but for love. As the battle neared its end, only Admiral Sullivan's flagship remained. The ship was heavily damaged, its weapons nearly silent, its shields failing. But still it fought on. Zethkar listened as the Admiral spoke to her remaining crew. It's been an honor serving with you all. Remember, we didn't lose this war, we just ran out of time. Admiral, came a voice from engineering. We could surrender. Maybe some of us would survive. No, Sullivan replied firmly. We made a promise. To fight for humanity's future, we keep our promises. The final assault came from all sides. Dozens of Vorthak ships converged on the human flagship, pouring fire into its hull. But even as the ship died around them, the humans continued to broadcast. This is Luna Base calling any human survivors, Admiral Sullivan said over the radio. The war is ending, but our hope is not. Somewhere out there, our children are still alive. Someday they will be free again. Tell them we loved them. Tell them we never gave up. The transmission cut off as the flagship exploded in a ball of fire. The last organized human resistance was destroyed. The war was over. General Korthax turned to his staff with satisfaction. Excellent. Prepare a victory message for the High Command. Earth is now fully under Vorthak control. But Zethkar felt no satisfaction. Instead, he felt something he had never experienced before. It was a hollow, empty feeling that seemed to eat at his insides. The humans called it grief. In the days following the battle, Zethkar found himself studying the recordings of the human final transmissions. He listened to them over and over, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The humans had not fought for conquest or glory. They had fought for love. Love for their families, love for their children, love for their way of life. Even in defeat. Even in death, they had chosen to express love rather than hatred. Zethkar thought about his own culture. The Vorthak fought for the Empire, for expansion, for power. They celebrated victory and scorned defeat. But they had no concept equivalent to what he had heard in those human voices. A month later, Zethkar was assigned as a governor on occupied Earth. His job was to maintain order and extract resources for the Empire. But everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of what had been destroyed. In the ruins of a library, he found books of human poetry and philosophy. In a destroyed school, he saw artwork created by children who would never grow up. In a bombed hospital, he found medical equipment designed to save lives, not take them. The humans had been building something beautiful. They had created art and music and literature. They had built schools and hospitals and places of worship. They had been trying to make their world better, not just for themselves, but for their children and their children's children. And the Vorthak had destroyed it all. Zethkar began to receive reports of continuing human resistance. Small groups of survivors still fought against the occupation, but their methods were different now. Instead of military attacks, they preserved human culture. They hid books and art. They secretly taught children about freedom and hope. The resistance was no longer about winning the war. It was about keeping humanity alive in the hearts of the survivors. They fought not with weapons, but with memory and love and hope. One night, Zethkar stood on his balcony looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vorthak Empire was planning to conquer more worlds, to destroy more civilizations like the one they had found on Earth. For the first time in his life, Zethkar wondered if his people were not glorious conquerors, but simply destroyers of beautiful things. They had won the war against humanity, but in doing so they had destroyed something precious that could never be replaced. The humans had fought not like warriors seeking death in battle, but like people, desperate to preserve life and love and hope. They had shown him that some things were more important than victory, more valuable than conquest, more precious than power. And that realization would haunt Zethkar for the rest of his days, because he knew that his people would never understand what they had lost when they destroyed the humans' capacity to love their enemies, to forgive their oppressors, and to hope for a better future, even in the darkest of times.